if you have a very strong desire and a passion, and you would do anything to get your art done, you would put everything else on hold and to work in your studio to get that done. If that passion exists and the discipline to work, you you will you'll move forward and you'll keep improving and getting better and finding ways to exhibit and sell your work and so on and so forth. And if you feel you need some work, take the classes, look for a teacher, finding that teacher who can do that for you to bring you up to the next level.
Welcome to the BoldBrush Show, where we believe that fortune favors a bold brush. My name is Laura Ungobert, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. To kick off the new year, we sat down with Susan Hope Fogel, an artist who works primarily in watercolor and oil, drawing inspiration from her natural surroundings in the lower Hudson Valley. She describes her journey into art, from early artistic validation in childhood to pursuing teaching and then transitioning to a full-time art career. Susan discusses her exploration of different mediums, particularly her experimental approach to watercolor that allows for spontaneity and happy accidents, while reminding us that there is growth within chaos. She emphasizes the importance of finding multiple income streams to support an artistic career and advises aspiring artists to seek out mentors and continuously learn new techniques. Susan also highlights the value of local community connections and engaging with audiences through open studios and exhibitions. Finally, Susan tells us about her upcoming workshops. Welcome, Susan, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
I'm good, Laura. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to have you because you have a very fascinating trajectory and you have tried, in my opinion, a lot of things that I want to try. And I think that our listeners will also really relate to, because you've gone through an incredible set of different mediums and different instructors and teachers and fascinating people. And now you've reached this really awesome, dreamy watercolor style that I'm thinking about trying, because I really love the dreamy quality of it, and how you mentioned at one point in our previous conversation that it has you kind of build this communication with your painting, and I'm so interested to hear you discuss that more, for my sake and for our listeners, because I think it'll also inspire them very deeply, especially in this new year. But before we dive into all of that fun stuff, do you mind telling us a bit about who you are and what you do?
I consider myself an artist. I try to spend as much time as I can in my studio doing watercolor, and I do oil also. And I have a family. I live in the lower Hudson Valley, so it's quite a beautiful environment. I could walk into my backyard and paint all day if I wanted to. And so I feel I'm in a good place right now for inspiration right out my door, and really enjoying, the process of painting and seeing and learning all the time from nature. So I'm
Yeah,
enjoying time.
that's awesome. Yeah, straight from the source too. I think that is such an amazing opportunity too, to be able to just go outside anytime. I think that's any artist's dream, is to, especially if they do plein air like you do, as you mentioned, in the warmer months. That is a dream come true, to be able to step outside and immediately be inspired by your environment.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I did want to know, because as I mentioned before, you had a very interesting trajectory with your career as an artist, and I'm so curious about it. Do you mind telling us, when did you first begin the path of the artist?
Well, I always drew. I remember being 4 years old, sitting on the floor in my den, and my mother was nearby, and I was coloring in a coloring book. And she said, "Someday you're going to draw without lines." And I think my brain exploded at that moment. I could not put my head around that concept at all. It was overwhelming. And so I always was doing something. My father was a photographer, and he used to hand me black and white photos, and he'd have inks that I would color in. Um, I was always doing something as a child, drawing in my backyard or whatever. And in first grade, the first time I got validation as an artist was in first grade because we had to draw faces of each other in class. And I was the only one who knew how to draw noses. And I looked up at one point, all my friends were lining up at my desk for me to draw the nose, So that was very exciting. And even in high school, I took as many art classes as I could. And then at 12, I decided I was going to be an art teacher because I really liked art. And I did not know about being an artist yet. I couldn't see that as a career, but I figured I knew art teachers because I had them in school. And so I went to school, became an art teacher, and I taught for 10 years. And after that, I got married and moved into New York City. And I wasn't teaching at the time. So I had the freedom. I said, well, I'm in New York City. I'm going to take some art classes. And we had the New York Times delivered every day. And I would pick out my favorite section of the paper to read. And this particular day, I sat down, I have some free time this morning. I think I'm going to go through the whole paper. And going through the paper, I saw this little article. It said, drawing for serious students. So that piqued my interest. And I started reading, and it was the introduction of the New York Academy of Art. They were just opening their doors. It was September of 1982. That's how old I am. So I was able to go to classes there. I had a great teacher. And we were drawing. It was based on the old academies, the guilds, drawing from plaster casts, the whole regimen to become an artist. And I loved it. I really enjoyed the process, and I stayed with that. And I learned a lot about drawing. I thought I could draw, but this was like really drawing, the black and white charcoal on toned paper, and really learning how to create light and shadow and form. So then the school had just started. We were in the second story of a church on 2nd Avenue and 7th Street. At the time, it was a Ukrainian area, so you can go out for lunch and get, pierogies and stuff like that. But the school was not as structured as it was later on, but they did have fantastic plaster casts that we could work from. And so I became disillusioned with the school and decided I'm going to leave. And I went to the Art Students League. And now I was, instead of going, so the process of going from the cast to the live figure was part of that. And I studied with Harvey Dinnerstein. He taught me how to use pastels. And I did a lot of portrait work at that time. But the classes were really crowded. So I went to the National Academy because Harvey Dinnerstein taught there also. And the classes were much smaller. I worked there for a while. And then I think I took a break because I was pregnant and I didn't want to be in the building with all the fumes. And so I decided I worked on my own at the Queen's Museum, who had their own collection of plaster casts. And I was working in the restoration room with the 3 restorers that were there who were working on plaster casts, they were life-size models and replicas of Michelangelo's pieces, pieces from the Medici Chapel, like Lorenzo de Medici and Dawn and Dusk, and sculptures like that. That was a great experience. And then I took a break and then had my son and then another son. And then we left the city. And we ended up in the lower Hudson Valley, which is a beautiful place. And another transition occurred at that time because I am driving along and I'm following the light as it crosses the road onto the grasses. And I almost drove off the road a couple of times. I said, okay, I've got to do some landscape painting. This is, and I found a teacher also at that time at the Ridgewood Art Institute. And I worked with, it was John Osborne, and he really developed my painter's eyes, really began to understand the concepts and principles of painting. And at the time, my interest was in landscape painting, but one day I was like, all right, you just finished your landscape painting and you have no other material. So in the class was set up, there was always a model. There were always 3 still life or floral setups. So you could do your own landscape painting or the still life floral or figure. And I said, I really don't like still life painting at all. I did not like it. So I said, okay. But I looked around the room and people were doing these beautiful, beautiful paintings. And I'm like, I've never done this. I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I worked on it. We had 2 days a week in that class. So I worked one day and then I came back the next day and I did it again. And then, finished the painting the next day. And I said, oh, it wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll try another one. By the 3rd day of painting in the North Light, like true North Light studio, I was hooked on the light. It was, the depths of the shadow, the luminosity of the shadow, the colors, the highlights that just sparkled, and I was hooked on painting in North Light. So that opened up a whole other world to me that I had not anticipated. And so I did the still life and I did florals and once in a while the portrait also in class. And so that was, that started a whole other avenue of inspiration for me. And I continued to do plein air, but what's interesting when I started the plein air, I think that was the most difficult thing to comprehend, landscape painting. It was so many factors involved in the changing light and the different atmospheric conditions. I remember bringing in a painting that was a stream that's a few miles from my house. And my teacher said to me, which way was the stream running? Were you looking upstream or downstream? I said, because the color, the value is going to be different. I looked at him and my heart sank. I said, that mountain of learning that I knew I needed to accomplish just got, multiplied. I said, because not only, I don't know the answers, but I don't even know the questions I'm supposed to be asking because I didn't know, it's like looking at a rug, like a Persian rug or something. You look at it from one side, it's lighter, and then you turn around, it's darker. The same concept. I had no idea. But I stayed with it and I really enjoyed that. And I still really enjoy that because you learn so much about light. And I love, and even in my watercolors, it's about the light, infusing that subject with the light, that strong contrast, light, shadow. And it's always a defining point of inspiration for me in my work.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And I bet that also really informed your watercolor work as well. I know that, oils and watercolor, they differ in a lot of ways, especially in how the colors interact and how you're even applying the colors, right? Because obviously with watercolor, you want to protect those lights as much as possible, whereas with oils, you don't really have to concern yourself about that too much. So I'm really curious about how you ended up with the experimental watercolors that you're now doing, which I absolutely adore. I really love how mystical they look. And I also wanted to ask you how serendipity really played a role in your entire trajectory as well.
Okay, so I'll talk about how it went from oil to watercolor. Um, I had a friend, Donna Haley, who was working in the city with Paul Chingbor at the Art Students League. And one of the students there opened up it was a loft space in Harlem. He bought the building and it was 5 floors, open floor plan. No walls had been put up yet. And he invited people from the class to participate and help him pay for the heat. And it was very minimal amount of money he was asking people. And Donna was there with some amazing painters. Well, Paul was there, Paul Chingbor, Norbert Weisberg was the man who owned the building. Chizuru Mori Kaplan, who's an amazing watercolorist. And there were Elizabeth Allison and Catherine Keller Larkins. They were just really amazing artists. To this day, they're still working at that. And and Donna was like, so overwhelmed. She said, you have to come and see the work these people are doing. And I walked in, I'm like, oh, wow, this is really amazing. I mean, when you're touched by something that you're like, you want to be part of that. And Norbert asked me, and Donna introduced me to Norbert and said, oh, Susan's an artist also, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, would you like to paint here? And I was like, yes, I would. So this was October of 2015, I think, and maybe 2014. And I eventually ended up coming into the class, into that building and working with these amazing artists. And the ground floor, they set up a gallery space. And we had exhibits there as well. And but I was doing my oils. I would take these big pieces of, canvas, like 4-foot pieces of canvas, and tack them on the wall and paint away. And Norbert would come over and says, you have the opportunity to work with this master watercolors. You should really take this opportunity. I said, yeah, I think I will. In the back of my mind, it was like, maybe, because it seemed so foreign to me to make that switch. And finally, by January the following year, I was in the class. And from the day one of playing with those paints, I was really enjoying it. And I had fun with that. So I was in Paul's class for a couple of years maybe, and then working on the watercolor. So that's how, just that introduction by my friend and getting into watercolor. Otherwise, I would never have entered that world, which has been very transformative. My students came to the exhibits that I had in the city, and they were like, oh, you should have a workshop in this. You should have. So I got a bunch of my students, some of them are doing oil and watercolor, and some of them only watercolor now. And they just say, it's fun. It's fun. There's something about the movement, being in the movement, because you're throwing the paint, you're splattering, you're splashing, you're dripping, you're pulling, you're doing all these things that are, so different than just taking that brush and running across a surface. So, but I feel like some of that has filtered into a few of my oil paintings. Like I'm more adventurous with the palette knife or something, I have one painting in particular, the dune grasses that I did was, the whole background is done with brush and the whole foreground is done mostly with a palette knife, just hitting the surface, and I don't think I would have done it if I hadn't, had that experience of throwing paint and really using the physicality of that. So
yeah, that's so interesting because it seems like so opposite to how I would see watercolor, right? Because I feel like watercolorists are some of the most careful people I know. And to imagine, breaking those rules, right? Which of course these rules are just guidelines. They're just there to guide you. But once you break them and you really set yourself free, it really opens up, from what I've seen in your work and how you describe it, it really opens up this whole other realm of the following this creative thread that you've mentioned. And it actually brings me very beautifully to my next question, which is, how can someone, follow that creative thread that you mentioned to me?
all right. What's interesting for me in my own experience, for my own work and trajectory, and my students, and seeing many students, is like taking that chance to try something new out of your own wheelhouse, out of the box, and it opens up something else. It opens up a new creative thread for you. And the form of expression, my watercolors, if I did the same painting in oil, they would not look anything alike. It wouldn't look like the same person was doing those two paintings. And I feel like having the opportunity to do that, I think it enriches you as an artist. I think it expands your creativity. I think there's only positive things that come out of it, even if you don't stick with it, but it just, expands your own creativity on some level or many levels. One thing that's been interesting to watch in my classes, if I have a student come in who's a real watercolorist, who's been working in watercolor for 20, 30 years, some of them have a really tough time, because I'll start the class and I'll do a demo and I'll say, throw this, throw the paint, try not to touch the surface. If you have to make a line, then, if you're going to make a straight line, you might, make it as kind of broken line coming down, but you're going in this direction, you're not just going like this. So the edges are really important in this technique. And there are some people just can't do it. They can't break that habit. They'll take the brush and I'm always, I can walk away from them, then I come back and I see they're back to they're using their traditional techniques. I recently did a workshop with 13 people who had come from the world of watercolor, and most of them, I have to say, were able to break through, use the technique. So it was really good to see. And they had some really interesting results. Some of them are continuing with me either remotely or in class. So some people really take to it. Other people are like, oh no, they can't. But maybe there's another medium that would resonate with them and make something else happen in their lives. I don't know. But I feel a little sad when I see an artist, who for 10, 15, 20 years is painting the same painting. And I'd love to see, a little expansion, a little experimentation. That's why I called it experimental watercolor, because it kind of releases you of, all the old rules. It's do what you want, try something, try anything you want, just get that paint on the paper, and we do talk about, the interesting thing is, at the beginning, when I was listening to my own conversation with my students, it sounded like I was in my class with the oil painters. We did talk about composition, what's working in this painting, what's not, how can we edit it? How can we improve it? So it's still, I want them to have a good painting out of it. It's not like just throw paint around and, see what happens. But there's been some interesting results. And the fun part for me is the little surprises that come when you're throwing paint and you have that lack of control. Happy accidents, what Bob Ross used to say, right? But there was some interesting things that happened, because at the end of the day, if I'm in the studio and then it's time, the lights getting low and I'm like, okay, it's time to go in. And I will just take my brush and I'll just randomly throw paint at, different spots in the painting, or I want to make a change. Well, I did that one day, and it was an image of two boys walking in the city, and they looked Asian because of their haircut, that blunt cut, and so I threw paint at them, and one of them, they're walking away from us. So we had the back of their heads. The next morning when I came in, one of them had a face facing me, and he was no longer Asian. He was African American. And I was like, that was just a crazy thing that happened. That was, one of those little surprises. So then it ended up turning the rest of his body around. So because it was so organic, it was just, the nose, the eyes, the hair, the jawline, everything was there. It was just, a very happy accident. It was, it's kind of crazy things happening. But and the students are enjoying it. They always say it's fun, and that kind of energy, the dynamic in the room when you have 5 people painting and they're all having, a good experience. It's very elevating. It's fun. It's fun for me.
Yeah, it sounds really fun. And it makes me a little bit curious about the process too, because you bring up an excellent point, especially when you said, how there are a lot of people who, and it's totally fine. People get into a comfort zone, but after many years of painting, they get, they get settled. Like you said, they get a little bit settled into maybe painting the same thing over and over, or they become comfortable with their own, I guess, equation, right? Because they know how to get from point A to point B and get the results that they want, which is totally fine. I know there are a lot of galleries who really love that because they know what to expect. So, bringing up the idea of, no matter what stage you're in your career, to bring up experimentation and to allow yourself to, be like a beginner again. It can be so hard for someone who's, quote unquote, an expert or much further along in their career, who's already gone through a lot of the process. It can be really difficult to really let go and to allow themselves to explore again. And it actually makes me curious about the process of the experimental watercolors. So I'm assuming you pin up a paper, and maybe would someone start out with maybe like a sketch of kind of like an idea they have, or like do they like go from there and they just start splattering and see what comes up? And then do you use different opacities at different stages?
Right. I don't let my students sketch their image. Okay. When I had that, when I did that workshop with these 13 people who have always done a sketch on watercolor paper, because, watercolor, you don't want to make mistakes. The thing about this experimental watercolor is that we use gouache and watercolor.
Okay.
So we have, one of my visual aids is an image of like 8 paintings, where I have the first painting in the image is a sheet of paper that I had used for a demo piece. It's totally abstract. It's splashes of color. It's wild. I mean, you look at it, I usually demo how to do a tree. So you can make out a tree, but everything else is just this abstract mass of different splotches and drips and splatters, and there's nothing there. And then I show the process of how I went from that to 2 figures walking in Central Park with figures in the background and a dog and trees and lamps and buildings. And you don't see a hint of what was there at the beginning. I might allow some color to show through here or there, but nothing there. There's a freedom in that, because if they start sketching it out, it's like paint by number. They're going to be wanting to take that brush and fill in all those little shapes. I said, no, this, just, throw it, and if it's something goes really crazy, we have our spray bottle to erase. We have, we could do, a lot of different things to get rid of, blot up the color, with a towel or a rag. And, in the process, you can get it, but there's so much more freedom when they're doing that. And it'll allow accidents, it'll allow other things to evolve. And I always tell them, you can start with a reference photo, but don't be married to it. In this process in particular, your painting is going to eventually may tell you what it wants to be, and you have to go along with it. So in the process, I'll have them, they'll have their painting, they'll start out in one direction. I'll have them turn it, in the 4 different directions, because they might have gotten to a point in the painting where they might have a painting there, or the inspiration for a painting that is so foreign from their original concept, their reference photo, or their drawing that they had value study, and go with that, because that's what the painting wants to be. You have to respect that, and that happens a lot. It happens a lot. I've had students turn paintings completely upside down and work from it. So it's a very interesting process, because you have to be open to those things, though, and be able to let go of that, the image you had in your head, because no, you're switching paths now. You're going in this direction because we're following what the painting wants.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen in oil painting. When you start these paintings, it's like, I don't have a roadmap for you. I don't have, the 5 steps you have to do to get your paintings. We can follow that. You can follow it. You can, work with the idea of, large shapes and strong contrast, and you can incorporate all those principles and concepts from traditional painting to help your painting, and you should be aware of it. But in the process of getting there where you want to go is a little different.
Yeah.
Because it's you're moving in one direction, then you have to back up and turn. There's a lot of maneuvering around to get to the final. A lot of times I'll do a painting, and I think some of my best paintings are from my imagination. So I've had more success, I think, with paintings from my imagination, not the figurative work. The figurative work is, because I have photos from trips and travels in Europe, and I've done several paintings with that. In New York City, I paint a lot from Central Park figures and very shadowy figures. So, but those are less about the imagination. I'll take liberties with the backgrounds and buildings and breaking through edges and opening things up. But you can look at it and say, oh, there's people here, you'll know. You'll know. But I like to infuse some mystery in a painting also. That is another aspect that I like to have, not to overly define, everything in the painting. I think allowing for mystery invites the viewer to come in and solve the mystery. What is it? What's lurking here? What is that shape? What is that? And then they're trying to figure out, is that a cloud or the edge of a building, a mountain? It's like it opens, it's more engaging, I think, for the viewer to have that, have a dialogue with the painting that way, not having every blade of grass painted and every pebble on the shoreline painted for them. And so that's and the technique allows for that, because if you do get overly defined, you spray it a little, blur it, soften the edges, and pull it, and that you can do things to it to get it more mystery to it.
Absolutely. And you bring up some really interesting points, because you mentioned, some keywords there that I really want to bring up, which are, mystery. You also brought up, these happy accidents, right? And that really brings back what we mentioned earlier about serendipity, right? It's almost like with these paintings, you're really allowing for that natural chaos to enter the work, which is so reminiscent of serendipity, right? Again, because for me, the way that I define it, I would love to know how you define serendipity. For me, it's, right place, right time, right preparation. But how would you say that serendipity has shown up in different aspects of your life?
There's, there was a time, I was getting a little disillusioned with the traditional painting. And I felt like, well, this came in at a good time, because I didn't want to keep on doing this and repeating, because I got to a certain level, I can do this, and I can do this, and I'm pretty good at it. And it's like, what's next? What's the next challenge? And I want to be challenged. I want to be challenged to expand creativity. And so that came, at a good time for me, when, I wanted to try something new. I think that's what happens. That's happened a few times in my life, where I was working at something, and then, okay, what's next? What's next? Now I'm thinking, oh, well, encaustic might be interesting, but, there's always something, that I'm thinking about as a new challenge. But so the serendipity, I think, came each time when I was ready to, try something new and explore something new. So that for me is exciting. It's discovery and the newness, and I think it's exciting. Sometimes it's extremely frustrating, because you could easily ruin a painting by you throw paint and you could easily destroy things. But then there's so many layers. It's when you talk about the process, it's a lot of layers. And a lot of students, they'll work for a couple of hours, said, okay, I think I'm done. And I'm like, no, you're just getting started. Because the more layers, there's some different things start happening texturally, and the surface becomes much more interesting when you get all those layers going. So that's always fun.
Yeah, and I really love that, because it goes to show that you've always been so open and receptive to what some people would consider chaos, but for you it's growth, right? I feel like there's so much growth that can happen when you allow yourself to enter that realm of what others might consider chaos, but you're so excited by it, right? You seem to be so open to it, where you're like, take me, I want to learn, I want to let my work grow, and I want to grow as well. And that's what it feels like is happening between you and your work, which is really beautiful to see.
Yeah, it's fun on this side of it too.
At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by FASO. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e-commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's FASO.com/podcast.
It's, looking forward to like, okay, what's going to happen today in the studio, so
Yeah.
it's energizing at times. But whenever we paint, there's frustration associated with it, so that I won't say that's gone. There is still, I'll spend 5 hours working on a painting and like, which way is this going? It's I call it what I used to call it the adolescent phase when I was working in, when in the traditional work, you start developing the painting and there's that one point is like, oh my God, which way is this going? Is it going to be a total failure? Or am I going to save this painting? And it's like giving birth, in like the toddler stage, the child phase, then you get to the adolescent. It's like, you're pulling your hair out, but, and is this thing is going to inform into a real adult, or is it, or are we going to have a problem here, the problem child? But yeah, so it's the same in the watercolor, the same kind of steps that you go through, the stages,
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear because since of course it is a very experimental thing, do you often find yourself detached from some of your work because you know that it might not work out, or do you do your best to help the work along so that it does work out and it does end up being a finished piece, or do you allow yourself to just play around and not worry about the results?
I do that, or I'll set it away for a while, and then when I take it out, I might immediately have a vision for it, and then I have an idea for it. But in that moment, I did not, maybe because I was looking at it too much. And I always tell my students, leave your painting here, don't look at it for a week, when you come back, you'll know what to do. And I think, if you look at a painting too much, you just stop seeing. And so if I do get to that point of frustration, and I might just put it away, because I have probably 10 paintings that I could finish right now. I put them away. And then I go back and I forget about them. It could be months and months, a year, 2 years later, and I'll pull it out and say, oh, I could do, so because we change, we're changing, our vision changes, our eyes change. So we're hopefully advancing our skills along the way, and you see differently, and you can resolve things, in a different way. So I never give up. The painting always becomes something down. Even if I've gone outside with the garden hose on jet spray to wipe off a paint. And then what's interesting is the ghost image that remains may inspire something totally different than what the painting was meant to be. But I've done that because when it's not now in the winter, but in the summer, I'll have my garden hose out there in the yard. And I've done that. My students have an area that they're working on, and it's a lot faster than using the spray bottle and, trying to get it off that way, especially the big pieces that are, 4 feet or something. They need a garden hose.
I think, that is it's really interesting because from how you describe it, even just that ghost that you mentioned of the image that's left behind of maybe something that didn't quite work out how you may have expected and you might want to rework it, it really makes it sound like the way that you work is very destructive and deconstructed, but at the same time constructive. Like it's so fascinating how it's it seems like it comes from a place of pure chaos and also little bit of nudging and control. I love it. It's so much just for that because it really does break a lot of the quote unquote rules or conventions that we might have about the traditional process for painting, especially if you compare it to oils, like you mentioned earlier. That I can see why a lot of people would struggle to allow themselves to go through that process because I can see how frustrating it could be for it to be so unexpected all the time. Like it's so beautiful because I think what I like about it, the way that you're describing it, is that there's this aspect of going with the flow. And I don't also, I mean that also in the sense that water flows, but but going with the actual flow of the painting. So many people, they try to fight against that current when really the best they can do from what you're describing is just to just allow it to go and then you go from there. I love that.
Yeah, it's a nice process. And one of the things I sense in one of the differences between the traditional painting and this watercolor technique is I felt like I was always in my head in the traditional painting. How do we create form, getting that light and shadow just correct, and the midtones and the blending and the color and the reflected light, and all those little things, the nuances that we have to remember to create that real image. And in this, I think part of it is the movement, the keeping movement and the flow, and your body is more involved. Your body is more involved. I feel like it's a more intuitive way of painting. I'm not in my head as much, and there's a flow to it, and I'm saying the flow, that the flow, being in the zone and all of that can happen in traditional painting also, but it's just on a different level. It's a different plane. It just feels more physical to me than the traditional oil painting that I was doing. So I think that's part of it. And there's a video of Paul Chingbour doing his painting, and it absolutely looks like he's dancing. He works with brushes, like 12-inch brushes, because he works on murals that he took 3 rolls of paper that are 10 feet high and 12 feet wide. He makes this, and he has to work fast and use these giant brushes loaded with paint. And he's like, whew, and he's like going back for more paint. And it's a dance. It's really interesting. If you could find that video of him, it's really beautiful to watch. It's the technique. And he's just throwing paint and splattering and then ends up with this beautiful image at the end. But
yeah. And I also like how you mentioned, flow being different between the two mediums, and in the sense of, allowing yourself to get out of your head and to go forward. But I also like that you mentioned earlier how even these experimental watercolors and how you have allowed yourself to go for it and experiment has also allowed that to happen more in your oil paintings, right? The two creative mediums feed into each other in that sense, which is really cool. I think, for our listeners, it would be worth, trying to break free from those constraints every so often, no matter how scary it is, to see how that can inform their newer work. Because I feel like, your work has definitely gone through these beautiful changes and this beautiful transition from face to face. And again, I absolutely love your experimental watercolors and how you've also brought in a bit of that mysticism from the Northern Light, because I'm also a big fan of the Northern Light. There's just something about it. So I think that is so awesome. If a listener wanted to try out something like that, what would you recommend, in the sense of like, trying maybe experimental watercolor or something of the like to help them be more intuitive with their work?
Um, I have a little exercise that I used to do when just it's kind of automatic painting. And I would just take drawing paper and water. And on the drawing paper, I would just very loosely, draw some movement of line and shape. Mostly, it's not too much. The whole surface is not wet. A lot of the surface remains dry. You're just making a funny squiggly shape or something on there. And then put in some color, drop some color into those shapes, and then set it aside and let it dry. And then I would take that and look at what I have and turn it and turn it and turn it and see if there's any imagery in there that can inspire a painting. And then many of them get thrown away and some of them become something. I see figures in there. I've seen trees. I've seen swans. Anything could show up. I mean, that's just a loose little exercise to do. And then I would enhance that further with colored pencils. But the experimental watercolor, there are some examples online of people doing that. And there are many people doing stuff with throwing paint, at surfaces, but they're more abstract. They are more abstract. Elizabeth Allison has a wonderful video called The Pilgrimage on YouTube. And she starts out with an image of people under a canopy, like at a cafe, under an outdoor cafe, and ends up with a complete abstract image at the end of the painting. And so watching the process, and as I said, Paul Chingbor has a video of his work, but we use a heavy paper. We use a 300-pound paper. It's gotten a little pricey. It's doubled in price since I started in 2015 with it. And the less expensive way of doing it is getting a big roll of paper. I think the weight is like 256 or something. It's not as thick and heavy, but it can hold up. It can hold up because it gets very wet. You're throwing a lot of paint at the paper, which is part of the process because the paper warps and it's not taped down at all, so it's free to move. But there's a lot of movement on the surface as well, which is another thing you can use. Because sometimes the paper will be rippled like this, and I'll drag a brush, and it'll only hit the high points. So it's another technique to use. It's you work with what you got going on, right? So, but yeah, it's just anybody could do it. But the problem is people don't have a place to do it. I don't know if you could see in my studio, there's plastic all over the place. So we have 4 sides for plastic. It's protection. As the floor is just a slab floor, so people can come in and be free to throw the paint wherever they want. We don't worry, But people, I said, well, try it in your shower or your bathtub, or when it's nice, go outside, and you could throw paint anywhere. Because that's one of the big problems. They don't have a place to do it. It gets a little, wild.
As it should. And that makes such a great point too, because allowing so much of allowing this chaos also is giving yourself the environment for it too, where you're not worried about the environment either, which can hold some people back, like, oh, I don't want to get this dirty. It's like, well, then maybe move to an environment where you won't worry about that. It could be outdoors, just really cool. Yeah, nice. And I wanted to ask you now about what it was like for you to, while you're doing all these amazing transitions in your work, what was it like for you when you made the jump into becoming a full-time artist?
Um, I didn't make much of a jump because I felt like I was always doing that. I was, I did teach for 10 years. That was the only time I had another real job. And after that, was between parenting when the kids are young, more parenting time and trying to fit in. I had a drafting table in my bedroom at the time. We were living in the city and always doing something. But becoming full-time artist now, most I try to devote as much of my time to it. But it was kind of a gradual transition, so it wasn't like a big leap from not being an artist to being an artist. So it's an easy transition when you're doing something you love to do. So that's
It's true. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
always had I know one of the questions is always like, well, how can you afford to be a full-time artist? And how could you when you're starting out and I always, like Jack Canfield says, you need four streams of income always. You don't depend upon that one job. So I've developed that. So it makes it, financially feasible. I think that's something that might stop a lot of people from taking that jump, quitting a job and moving into a full-time artist. But it's
Yeah.
good planning, financial planning and financial security first. And then, and if they're doing what they love and have the passion and the discipline for it, and good things can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask, what were some of the, or like, what are some streams of income that you would recommend for an artist who wants to, do something like how you're describing, four different streams of income?
Well, you need to find residual income streams because you don't want to put more time and effort into something. Your time and effort you want to keep in your art. I think owning real estate, which is not not possible for everybody, but I mean, you see things on Instagram all the time now that, you buy a 2-family or 3-family house with a low income loan. There are these loans that could be made and if it's occupied when you buy it, you have the stream of income to pay the mortgage, but doing if you have the financial wherewithal to do that, I think that's great. I think that's a really a good. You don't have to worry about the market going up and down and driving you crazy. So that's one thing. And getting older because you get Social Security, that helps.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's the best thing is like finding a residual income stream, you know,
Mm.
so you're not taking time away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Because it like you said, it's good to conserve energy for and time for the things that you want to actually do or the things that are also going to bring you a lot of income, be that painting or teaching, which
Mhm.
I know a lot of artists in teaching or they'll do like online courses, which is something else that could
Right.
also technically be, like residual or passive income that just comes in if, you're able to have say for example like the social media following and all of that in order to get enough people to buy your course, which is another option as well.
Yeah.
um so you are currently teaching, as you mentioned. How has it been for you to balance teaching and also working on your personal paintings?
I've limited myself right now to 2 classes. I'm trying to hold it to that, but if I have enough people that are interested, I might do 3. But they're only 3-hour classes, so it's 6 hours right now out of my week that I devote to the teaching. And in addition to that, I might do a workshop. If it's a full day workshop, that might be 6 hours or 5 hours for the workshop. So it's not a lot of my time. I think I did more in the past, but I've cut back a bit. So I have more painting time. And if I get a day where maybe only 2 out of 5 students show up, which has happened, I said, okay, I can paint too. I'll paint along with them because I'm not, the helicopter teacher where I'm at their shoulder all, the whole day. So I pay attention to them, but I'm not, obsessed with what they're doing every minute. So it allows me some time. But it's a little more difficult to paint when you're constantly having to move away from the painting. You can't stay focused. So my preference is always paint by myself.
Beautiful. Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to someone who wants to become a full-time artist? And how does mindset and doubt, play a role in holding a person back?
All right. If you have a very strong desire and a passion and you would do anything to get your art done, you would put everything else on hold and to work in your studio to get that done. If that passion exists and the discipline to work, you you'll move forward and you'll keep improving and getting better and finding ways to exhibit and sell your work and so on and so forth. And I think it's hard to judge your own work. So getting feedback from people who are knowledgeable and getting help, and if you feel you need some work, take the classes, look for a teacher that, I have a few teachers that change the way I work, the way I see, really, is because then as an art teacher, you're teaching people to see more than teaching them how to paint or draw or anything. And finding that teacher who can do that for you to bring you up to the next level, keep improving you. And I tell my students, find other teachers to go to. Don't just learn from me, because you're going to learn something different from somebody else to improve your work. And find the work of people that you admire, that you love, and take some classes, whether it's online or in person, or that is something to just, even at this age, I want to learn more. So I'm always open to taking classes and courses and finding out, because I think the more I learned about art, the more I realized, I had to learn. It was so much.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. And you make an excellent point as well about, needing to work on your stuff. Earlier, how you mentioned, like if you're passionate enough to work on that, right? And if you free up some energy, by getting those residual incomes or passive income, that also gives you that, time and energy to really focus on your work, and then also hopefully getting some classes, like you said, from other people, maybe getting a mentor, and then getting another mentor to be able to get those eyes, right, to teach you how to see, which, like you mentioned, is so key in making your work improve, right? Because the best thing that a teacher can give you, or a mentor, is independence, right? The ability to see, so that you're not always relying on others. But then you also have that paradox where, like, okay, I know how to see now, but then I'm still kind of blind to my work after a certain amount of time, so I still need, other feedback, which I think a lot of artists struggle with, because we feel so attached to our work, or we feel like it's such a vulnerable thing. And if someone says, oh, that's not right, we might feel like, oh no, I messed up, I'm immediately a disaster. But it's not true. And as your work has shown too, the you are always growing, you are always learning, you're always improving, and that's the important part.
That's the fun part for me, making those changes and trying different things. That's the interesting thing for me, because I remember my first class with experimental watercolor, and I call it experimental water. Other people call it expressive watercolor, or it's kind of incorporates the concepts of deconstruction also. And that first class, I had 4 students, and they came from the world of oil painting, because we were painting still lives, plein air. So they were all on the same page. And I was blown away by what they did in that first class. It was amazing. It was really amazing. And finding their voice was I can't say it was immediate in the watercolor, but it became more apparent a lot sooner than it could in the oil, because of the oil, and for myself as well. I felt like, I was painting in oil and I had my style. People could kind of see my style, but it wasn't that much of a individual expression. And it didn't feel like, maybe it was part of me, but I didn't feel like I can identify like Kathy Odom or, some other people that you can immediately see their style. I didn't have that in oil painting, but in the watercolor, it happened. So that's an interesting thing to observe in class, because I have, several students now doing the watercolor, and they are developing a style of their own. It just, the flick of the wrist or whatever, whatever it is that gets the paint off the brush. And yeah, it's really interesting thing to see. I think there's more possibility in that medium and that technique than there is in oil, because, in oil, we're all trying to get the same, get that paint on it. It's, I get maybe the viscosity of the medium. I don't know what, but I do see people taking oil paint and thinning it out and getting drips and things in it. So that's always encouraging to see that. And who is it of the Odd? You told me about Odd Nerdrum, and he's scraping, and yeah, because at one point I said, okay, now I love we're painting on panels, on wood panels, and I love the texture of the wood and that surface. And now, because I have that ability in watercolor to pull and scrape and lift and drip, and I said, how am I going to get that in oil? How can I do that? And I probably working on wood would be the next step for that. Being able to actually scrape the whole surface and edges and cutting through edges, lifting it, paint, and, working in layers and seeing color underneath and stuff. There's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I really love that, because it goes to show that there are a lot of self-imposed limits as well, right? Like how earlier we mentioned how, like, or at least I mentioned that a lot of career watercolorists are so careful. Their hand is so steady,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so hard for them to break out of that. And the same happens with oil paint as well, where oil painters, especially classically trained ones, will use tiny brushes. The tiny brush people totally get it. I've been there. I am one of those tiny brush people. It's very hard to break free from tiny brushes. So I understand how that could also limit voice, because we are so perfectionistic, right? We have this tendency of wanting to make the thing as it is, as close as possible, with tiny brushes or whatever, very steady,
Right.
perfect drawing, perfect line work, etc. That it's really cool when you realize, wait a minute, I can dilute the heck out of this paint and create layers and layers and layers, because there are no rules, right? These academies, of course, they do teach, right? They do teach us the basics, the important rules, quote unquote, guidelines of how the medium works and how you can manipulate it to a way that is realistic, in a way that will get you from point A to point B. But then once you decide, hey, this is just a guideline, and now I have muscle memory, right? And I can be more free. I think that is so cool, because you mentioned how you reach that voice a little bit quicker. And I think that's so fascinating, because it's a lot of people compare it to handwriting. That is so amazing how even the flick of their wrists can be so personal, that it just comes up. So wow, I think that, yeah, that makes a very large statement about the importance of liberation in your own work. And even within your work, liberating yourself from all these glass ceilings we place upon ourselves, which is really awesome.
Yeah. Perfection, if any, yeah, I'm a perfectionist in a lot that I do, but um in this technique, I maybe look for the imperfections more than the perfection, because the edges are really important in this technique. That's what gives it that dreamy quality, because the edges are never, if I see a straight line in a work my students are doing, I said, you got to get rid of that. You got it's kind of ambiguous, like where does that edge end and the next shape begin? And, because it's a shared edge, but it's not defined. It's very soft, and sometimes it disappears, like in painting, in any painting, we're doing lost edges and found edges and hard edges and soft edges. And, so it's a lot of that,
Yeah.
to blur the edges, like the concept of it's all one, that weaving together of, bless you,
Thank
weaving
you.
together of, you know, form to background and background of, so like where does one begin and one end? It's they're together.
Yeah. Yeah. And even conceptually, when you do look at something, lines don't really exist, right? There's no lines are just a creation that we made to try to understand the world in a more simple way. But yeah, once you start literally blurring the line between how we think we see the world and how it actually is, it's a lot more chaotic, a lot more holistic, which is a little bit the opposite of what we're taught at these academies, which is so cool because I feel like, you have to have that base or at least some sort of base of understanding of how to draw and basic technique.
Yeah.
And then you can start leveling up into this more complex exercises like the one that you're doing. I feel like it might, I know you get a lot of, you mentioned in a previous conversation, you get some beginner painters or some beginner artists. Do you find that, for beginner artists, it might be a little bit easier to jump into those complex concepts, or is it still a very uphill battle for them?
I think a beginner painter in the technique of experimental watercolor have probably an easier time, because they don't have any preconceived ideas. So in some respects, it's easier. But then when it comes to, if they don't have experience of the drawing, if they're trying to create a shape or form or something, you might have some difficulty with that. When you talk about drawing, I felt like, once I really got a good handle on drawing, it gave you a certain amount of freedom, because you could do you can draw people, you can draw buildings, you could draw, still life, flower, you can do anything because you have an understanding of, how to create a form. And a lot of times I'll have a student, even in this technique, I have a student wants to come in and do a landscape painting, and they have a beautiful photograph. And then she says, but I want to make the light go this way, and I want to have the shadows and the trees go like this. And I said, have you done a lot of plein air painting? No, never. I said, okay, I wouldn't even try. you know, you know, you have to have, some knowledge if you want, even though we're not, I give my students a lot of leeway because we're not creating a realistic painting. We have splashes of color that identify as form and sky and land. But so they have a lot of freedom. But when it comes to the light and the movement and, shape and form, I want them to have some, some replica, that we get a sense of what that object is. And so coming with more experience and knowledge can't hurt, but it's a lot of that gets tucked away, in the process of this technique. We don't, I'm not obsessing about creating, the perfect trunk of a tree or, light on a tree. It's not, it's the whole effect, looking at that big picture,
Yeah.
not worrying too much about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you mentioned, leaving that mystery, which I think it's beautiful because it's also very narrative in a way. You're allowing the viewer to complete the image. And I love that with your experimental watercolors, you can really aim for that and hit that point because it it really is very dreamy. Like there's so many things that our brain whenever we have a dream, our brain fills in the gaps. Even though when you really think about it realistically, nothing makes sense. But it's beautiful to get the viewer to dream like that.
Yes, yes. I think of the splatters and the strokes and everything, like it's a tapestry, and you're just weaving together these threads that eventually, create that whole image. So,
Yes, very beautiful. Very beautiful. Do you have any final words of wisdom or advice for our listeners who are really wanting to maybe find their own voice or really start taking their dream of being an artist seriously?
okay, if they're trying to find their own voice, I would say make sure this is something that brings you great enjoyment. And I think a lot of people, like when, you know, you and I have the experience of going through academic training where it's very serious. And I didn't ever think of it as fun. I'm having fun now. But I think the training and everything is important to have that foundation to start with. Have a good drawing teacher, have good, drawing lessons, establish some drawing skills, and then move into painting. You know, then you have, if you want to be a representational painter, I'd say you need the foundation of good drawing skills, understanding of development of form, etc. And from there you can paint. But I remember being in a portrait class, and the people came in right off the street, and they want to paint, and they have no drawing skills, and the school at the time didn't have drawings. This was at a school I went to in New Jersey, in Ridgewood Art Institute, and they didn't at the time have a drawing class. Now they have drawing classes. And I was like, wow, that person really needs to draw first. It's really difficult. I mean, especially portrait, not to have drawing skills and try it. So that's one thing. If they're thinking of becoming a, representational painter. If they're going to be an abstract painter, I've seen amazing, outsider artists who have no training, who are doing amazing things, beautiful work. And it's possible to be a very successful artist without that, but know what your skills, what you need to, if you're pursuing that aspect of it. And yeah, that's an important part.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I completely agree. Yeah, you have to know more or less where your weak points are, where your strengths lie, and then work with that. Yeah, very perfectly said. Yes. Do you have any upcoming shows or exhibitions, workshops, or anything that you would like to promote?
I will be posting information about my upcoming workshops. It's January and I'm planning. I'm just in the planning stages, but I do watercolor workshops. I do the experimental watercolor workshops. And I'll have a couple of those throughout the year. So that's something people could get maybe on my website after I post it. And if they want to get in touch about classes, I don't know if I live in Warwick, New York, which is the lower Hudson Valley. And some people live far, some people live closer. I do have a couple of remote students that I work with via Zoom. And that works out, because I could see the work and we could talk about it. And that's been working out okay. That's a possibility.
Awesome. Well, where can people see more of your work?
My website is susanhopefogelfineart.com. And I have a gallery up in Hudson, New York, Carrie Haddad Gallery. That's that. And that's right now. And my paintings are on exhibit in a restaurant in Warwick because a gentleman opened this restaurant in town, and he wanted local landscapes. And he asked me if I had any, if he had my work. And so he had these big walls, and I happened to have 2 4-foot canvases of farms. So that worked out well.
That's awesome.
In my storage closet.
Yeah.
And I've sold a couple of paintings from there as well. So that's nice. Because people recognize the local landscape, so they like that.
Definitely. And it also, it also reminds us of the importance of also being the local artists, right? Working with, local restaurants, local cafes, local anything, because they also like to support their artists, and they also kind of work out as galleries in themselves. A lot of people see the work
Yeah.
and maybe they fall in love with it.
Yeah, a lot of restaurants do that. I did have an open studio in December this year also. I do an open studio almost every year. That's a fun event because you get people coming in, you're meeting, neighbors, friends, and fellow artists come in, and I do a demo, and I've gotten new students from that, commissions, sales, so it's a nice event.
Yeah.
Get to be at home in my studio, so.
Yes. Yeah, and as I've mentioned maybe in past episodes, being an artist it can be a very isolating career because it's a very
Mhm.
solo thing. So it's really nice to meet new people.
Yes, and I think the social aspect of teaching is really because those students have become my friends.
Yeah.
Who and I love the dynamic of a group in the studio. These people have been with me for a while, so and have followed me, from the oil painting, as I said, to experimental watercolor. So
Wow, beautiful.
that's
That's
been
awesome. Yeah. Well, that's really awesome, Susan. I will actually be looking at your experimental watercolor workshops. Hopefully, I might be in the States, and I can hopefully align with one of those because that sounds so exciting. But yeah, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. You gave me so much food for thought.
oh good. And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And Happy New Year.
Oh yes, have a good year.
You too.
Okay, be well.